Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Welcome back to Tune It Over. I'm Jack Chew, and we try to grace you 12:30 till 1 o'clock on weekdays. And most of the time, we managed to had a bit of a hiatus a couple of weeks ago whilst I was on a holiday, and I've been pleased to see you. Many of you have returned. Many argued, was this season 2? A lot of people do that now, don't they? I always wonder, is it that people mean to split it up into seasons, or do they just fall off the wagon and then want an excuse? I'm not sure. We've never done that. We're approaching some milestones. You'll notice 197 episodes of this, but more importantly, approaching the 100th episode of Physio Matters. Now, we've done more than 100 broadcasts on Physio Matters, of course, but that's 100 consecutive months, which is why we'll probably make a bit of a fuss about that. So start to, if you haven't already given thought to that, because some of you have been putting in your feedback in as part of our bigger questionnaire that we've put out recently, which is great. We've got some results of that coming later in the week. People have been suggesting what we should do for that and the people we should have involved. So do let us know who you want to have on this show as well as on Physio Matters as we approach these exciting milestones. But today is the sort of, I don't know, I would say like a bit of an announcement, but also almost like an FAQs on what I think is one of the most exciting projects that I've heard about. Even prior to its launch, I've got a bit of insight from the man who's joining me on the show, Ollie Coburn, a few months ago. I would say such a brilliant, innovative sort of concept and project, and something that I think one of the things I'm most excited about is I'm not sure where it will go, but I know that its principles are so strong that whatever option it decides to take, I think it is likely to do really well. And we need to get behind ASAP because I think the time is now for it as well. I think it's so timely. And I'm talking, of course, about Freehab. You should have seen it in the title. As well as please do make a note and put, even if you haven't got time today, put it open in your tabs, go to freehab.co.uk and leave it there and bump into it at a later date. Just make sure at some point this week you engage with what it is, understand it, and then be thinking about it when it is something that feel you see patients or hear of things that might be appropriate for consideration, so you can signpost people to it, because I think it's a really important one. But I just want to get all the detail out from Ollie, who joins me now. So I'm just going to try a few clicks, and then hopefully, so let's hide my little frame. See, I'm still a bit rusty on this, aren't I? From my break, got my captions, and then hopefully I've got my guest. Ollie, can you hear me?
I can, mate. Hi.
Good. Slick as ever, wasn't I there on my on my clicking? So as I've just said in my typically waffly introduction, I am giddy about this project, I'll be honest. And I think one of the things I'm most giddy about is the fact that as I look at it, it's not got any sort of rigid format to it in terms of where it could go. It's a principle in which it's then almost like, let's see what we can do with it. And I think that's one of the things that most excites me is the interest in where it could go. Could you start by telling us a little bit about its sort of origins as to when you came up with this, and maybe your thoughts on whether or not I've missed something and there is a real hard and fast plan as to where it could go or not?
No, there's no hard and fast plan. We're starting and trying to sort of keep up with how fast it's growing. It started, you'll remember, initial conversations we had a long time ago, and with a few other people. Andy Hosgood was another, about setting up a social enterprise to kind of address this inequality in access to healthcare. And obviously we have an NHS in the UK, so everybody can access healthcare, but there are clear issues around waiting times and local services and who doesn't get access. So I always wanted to do something, and I think initially I was going to do something on a local level in Manchester, and it would have been in-person clinics, and that was going to be very difficult to do from a resource perspective. So went away, thinking cap on, and a few conversations with people, and we came up with Freehab. So we're all online. We're going post-COVID, carrying on with the telehealth, and it's that principle of ensuring that anybody can access the service that is really the underpinning thing.
Yeah, because I think that's that principle we talk of, and I think that therefore, because we've got an NHS, it's like, well, free at the point of access through the NHS, and then you've got a private sector, often through frustrating me, and you've spoken publicly about the frustrations at the lack of joined up communication that can occur across sector. But generally speaking, you've got this somewhat isolated private sector that then is often able to serve people fairly swiftly. Usually people will be able to access an appointment with a local private provider providing within a week if they've got the flexibility within their schedules on both parties. But then on the NHS, there's waiting times, there's access, there's a postcode lottery in terms of quality, which is often very difficult to talk about. What we talk about an awful lot really is that disparate difference between the quality, but also this disparity. What's it in the? What's that? I'm losing the phrase we're always saying, which is what's the phrase? Always going on about it. Variation, unwarranted variation in care quality in MSK. So your project seems to be trying to join the dots a little bit between that. You wanted to bring quality, reassuring, rehab-centered MSK advice to an audience that might not necessarily be able to afford it, but without the challenge of having to enter the public health system. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So completely self-referral. And we will accept referrals from other HCPs, and particularly we're working with GPs at the minute. But yeah, if you want to come along and access our service, you can do. You book it in online, you fill out your questionnaire, you get your appointment, and you get access to the advice. There's no payment, so people aren't asked to pay up front. They don't have to give us any payment details or anything like that. They're simply provided with an option after they've received their care, where if they want to make a contribution, they can do, and that's how we're funding it.
And is that after each appointment they're invited to, or is that almost like an episode of care they're then given an open-ended invoice?
For the moment, it's a kind of a notification that they receive after each appointment, but that's simply because we don't know how many appointments people are going to receive. So, for example, some of the first people that we've had through the service have only had the 1 hour first appointment, and that's all that's been required to give them the education, advice, reassurance that they wanted when they came to us. And we didn't really, there wasn't kind of an acute issues like, I don't know, calf strain or whatever, where we could go, right, well, here's 4-6 weeks of rehab, and we'll check in with you along the way. So it's a little bit open-ended, and I think we'll keep that kind of fluid as the service grows and develops and we see what kind of stuff we're getting through. But yeah, there's an opportunity for them to contribute, and it's been really nice. Some people have paid what you would consider to be a normal appointment fee, and we've helped other people, as the name suggests, completely for free.
And is that something that is accessible to anyone? What, in the UK? Is it international? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so we're just UK at the moment. There are obviously issues around licensing, insurance, etc. for going international. But who knows in the future? Because we're definitely not the only country where this kind of structure and initiative would be helpful. Particularly somewhere like the US. There'd be a huge demand for this. But for the moment, we are just the UK, yeah. And I mean, the scale in the UK is massive. There's 18 point something million people with MSK conditions that vary in complexity, duration, etc. And then when you look at average cost of private care, average cost of PMI, there's a huge proportion of those 18 million people that just simply can't afford to access the private sector. And I get varied levels of input from the public sector, some of which is none at all.
And so you've got clinicians that will be offering time windows they'll be. Are they donating their time to the cause?
Currently, they are. Yeah. So I've got some wonderful people around me. Give them a shout out: Ryan Gordon, John T. Ashton, Adam Naylor. At the moment, and obviously myself, I'm doing some appointments. Very, very kindly donating their time currently. We do want to look at in the future being able to pay clinicians for their time at normal market rate. What we need to understand first is what our average appointment value is, because we haven't got the data on what our average contribution is from people that use the service. Clearly, if that's £3 or £4, then we're going to continue to rely on a voluntary model, people giving up their time. And all that will do, that's no bad thing. All that will do is perhaps limit the number of appointments that we're able to offer, but we'll still be, helping and being true to our mission and vision.
And I think that's where it will be interesting, because you want to. I like the fact that you've launched this. I'll be honest. I knew that this had been coming, But I like that you've launched it now rather than waiting on trying to see whether or not you could qualify for it in principle for various different grants or other seed funding elsewhere. I think that you're giving it a whirl and seeing what emerges, seeing what that average price is, seeing whether people end up valuing the service in such a way that then every third person ends up paying over the odds, arguably, for what you could then support your clinicians. It's good to find that out as you are doing. I think I would say the opportunity that could knock if the right people recognised its value and backed it through grant and other funding, I think it could be so interesting to see just how far that could go, because I think encouraging clinicians to just donate a couple of slots, I think that's the thing, is just protecting slots there would be a really useful thing. How do you keep because I imagine, especially on this show, for those that have seen you in the episodes that you've been on this show, we're both really passionate about consistency and quality. How do you make sure you maintain that? Because that's going to be so important for, as the sort of system grows, the GPs and other HCPs, as well as then the public that catch wind of this initiative, referring themselves in, it's only as good as the quality of care delivered. So if it ends up being really superficial, it ends up being just as good as if they'd have just pressed it into Google. It's going to really catch on.
100%. So a lot of it is about having standardized processes with oversight. So when people book in, there's a standardized pre-appointment questionnaire that gives us the opportunity to screen some stuff in and out, check that it's actually appropriate for not only an MSK service, but MSK service with online delivery. And obviously those where it isn't, we signpost and refer appropriately. The same is true for the initial consultations that we complete. So there's a standardized process that's had oversight from John Morgan, who's our medical advisor. He's a GP, sport and exercise medicine doc. And John's kind of working with us on an ongoing basis to ensure the quality of those processes. And then we're asking our clinicians to use that standardized assessment process so that we have some consistency across the board, and that as far as is possible, the quality is consistent. I think the other thing to mention, only because I don't want to miss it, is we're there for MSK issues, but within that standardized assessment, we're also doing the wider lifestyle stuff, the making every contact count. So we're taking, because we've got an hour and we're able to give people an hour of quality time that perhaps they might not get on an NHS appointment or a GP appointment, we have the opportunity to ask about the wider lifestyle things, so mental health, alcohol, smoking, nutrition, sleep, etc. And then we can do brief interventions on that. So touch wood will impact slightly more broadly than MSK as well.
And so how if this does, and we'll do all we can to make sure it does, like the touch paper and catch, how do we stop this becoming a drag effect on the market rate, which is something else that you and I have been passionate about privately, but also I think on this very show, in your previous appearances, we've talked a bit about making sure that we don't race to the bottom and things like that. Some would argue this is the ultimate race to the bottom if you've got a parity of service that's maintaining its quality with even some of the same personnel. I can see Ollie Colburn for free or donation, then it just drags the market rate down. How would you defend that?
Well, you still can, funnily enough. So, I've got some private appointments in person this week that people are paying me for. Funnily enough, they were presented with the option of using Freehab. I think this, do you know what? This was one of the things that I was most conscious of when setting this up, because I'm very keen not to devalue the industry and the service and advice that we offer. I think the first thing that we're trying to do is qualify the people that come through. So we're not asking people for war and peace, and we certainly, wouldn't be quick to turn people away, but we are saying, like, why would you like to use Freehab? Just as a very open question, and eliciting perhaps that response of, oh, well, I'm on a waiting list and it's too long. I need help now and I can't afford to go elsewhere. So we're trying in some way to qualify it, and we might have to go a little bit deeper on that in the future to qualify that. Referrals is going to...
You wouldn't be creating systems that could actually means test people, but there's a potential that you might be implying in that direction almost, will you, in the future?
Yeah, as in, if you're on comfortable salary and you've got the disposable income, our service isn't necessarily aimed at you. Obviously, we're not passing judgment on people, and if we're trust that if people are coming to use us because they need to use us, that's well intentioned. But yeah, we're aiming specifically at a target market of people who wouldn't be able to access the private sector. We're not trying to steal anybody's clients, patients, because we're not aiming at the same target market. The people that come to you at Choose Health, for example, can have the means in place to be able to do that, and therefore shouldn't need to use us. And of course, we're an online only service. So for a lot of people that come to us, that might not be appropriate. It might not be what they want. And therefore they won't use us. They'll go and seek out in-person care somewhere. So, there are, I don't want to use the word limitations because it makes it sound negative, but there are limitations to the model that we're using. And to an extent that stops us devaluing all private sector care.
That's a good point. I was going to ask that actually, if you hadn't mentioned it, is it almost smart to parameterize it in some way as if compromised compared to what might be standard private practice care in order to make sure that differentiation occurs? One way in which you could do that is, do you anticipate there being upper limits to the amount of sessions, for example? Again, it'd be an inappropriate thing to do in many NHS and private services. But you said 4 sessions.
It's 3, so we're not open-ended. So there's the initial consultation. People will go through that, be provided with advice and rehab. We're using Rehab Guru for the rehab. So that's the interactive. We then have an agreed review appointment date, which is somewhere around 50% of the way through their rehab plan. And then there's we can tweak and amend things at that point.
Right.
Update on the advice. And then there's a final review appointment where the aim is we want to get people self-managing by that review appointment. And we can then say kind of off you go. What we may do, if it's clear that they need ongoing support, is try and refer or signpost appropriately to where they can access that. But
also people could have then ended up
limit. If we had somebody, one individual seeing us every month, our service would very, very quickly be.
It amuses me that you get same person, slightly different initials with a false mustache coming on under a different alias or whatever. But of course, people, because I don't raise the issue of say market devaluation or the prospect of it being misused or abused. I don't bring that up really with any perception that that's a real risk. I think it's often talked about in political terms in the UK about food banks. They don't means test at food banks. And so if you've got some sort of high flung six figure salaried yuppie turning up for a food bank parcel, it's like you might not be able to protect the system from that. But similarly, there's just a social contract that we can imply, and unless it was abused to the nth degree, then that doesn't matter. So I think that the parameters you've put around the project are sensible. I think that it does help with it being online only, especially for access. And also, I'm excited about the fact that the format lends itself to rehab-centric MSK care that then isn't about narrow diagnostic categories and then complying someone within some sort of protocolized system. It sort of lends itself to individualized and facilitated supported self-management, which of course we're passionate about as a model of care. So a really exciting principle. I think that the more we can understand it professionally as well for who we might signpost, there's so many people pulling their hair out that work in, say, fracture clinics or in primary care or in first contact that are then recognizing that their ability to signpost a patient or refer a patient into a system that will care for them appropriately, because there might be an 8-week wait on the local MSK department, but equally they recognise that even if they raised it as being a private option, then that's something that makes that patient's eyes water. That safety net in between that Freehab can offer, it's quite an exciting opportunity. And also, I think, and I suppose I should ask the live audience that are tuning in now directly, is that something that might then lend, help you to not just make those referrals, but potentially even then donate your time and services to the project? Because for me, I can imagine that having that relationship with, as a clinician, having that relationship with Freehab, that you might recognize and identify patients that might be able to be served there, but then also in witnessing who that help you, potentially realize what you could do and how you could offer your time into that, even if it's just a few slots a week or a fortnight. Has that happened yet, Ollie? Do you anticipate that happening? And again, if you're listening live, please let me know as to what your thoughts are on this and whether you feel that you might engage with it in those ways.
I put this out on LinkedIn because I literally just added it as a job role on LinkedIn, something that I was doing, and did no real update. And then I had like 3 or 4 messages from different clinicians in my network saying, I love it. Can I get involved? Can I actually give you some of my time? So people are doing that already, which honestly is blowing me away, because I thought I was going to have to like beg, steal, borrow, and get on my knees to ask people to come and help. But it turns out that people are actually really keen. So that's been really refreshing. And yeah, kind of the more the merrier, really.
Are you confident that the system is made efficient enough for it to feel like? Because I think, as I've noticed with all of my wider work, which has been highly reliant on volunteers and casual labour that are just passionate about the cause, are you confident you'll be able to create a system that's efficient enough to really take advantage of the time that is donated to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, simply from an admin perspective, everything's fairly automated. Like once someone books in, it's kind of all done for you.
Yep.
Meetings are set up, forms are sent out to the patient, blah, blah, blah. I think the most time-consuming bit for us is the onboarding process. So once somebody comes along and says, I want to get involved, I want to help, it's actually just getting them set up and getting them familiar with, the platforms that we're using, and ensuring they're up to speed on our clinical processes. And one of the things that will be padded out over time is having some form of light touch application process and sort of questionnaire. Do you align with our ethics, our values, our vision, and also clinically, do you align with what we're trying to do?
You've preempted my next question.
Really
how are you going to? Because that's one of the things that I'm fascinated to see how you guys navigate. Is, are you going to look a gift horse in the mouth? Is there an opportunity where someone might be offering some of their time that you then need to turn them down on because you recognise that would then have a drag effect on the quality, consistency that you might be able to deliver? That's a tough thing to navigate in any circumstance. But when you're paying salaries, you're employing into a role, then you can be discerning on your recruitment. Whereas I'm interested I imagine, I know how thoughtful you are on this sort of stuff, that you'll be giving that some thought, but what's your plans for how to navigate that conundrum?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I said at the beginning, we're hoping to move towards the point where we can actually recruit and pay, which would be lovely all in time. I think the former, we're not going to compromise quality just for the sake of getting a clinician through the door, because I'd rather just not do the appointment, to be honest. I want people doing our sessions that enjoy promoting self-management, enjoy promoting people leading active and healthy lifestyles on all fronts, and that are going to give people sensible, honest MSK advice without selling any of the gimmicks. From as a profession, from a clinical background as a sport rehabilitator, as you'll know, I'm very rehab centric, exercise centric, activity centric, and that's really what we want to incorporate. I mean, the model doesn't really allow for much different. It's not like we can, needle and rub things.
Not a lot of shockwaves being done through the cameras, is there?
Correct. So it has to be education, advice, reassurance, and rehab. It's about obviously doing that in the right way. But I would also like to think that we'll attract people who are of that sort of similar thought process anyway, in the most part. If people are kind enough to come forward and generate the time, you'd like to think that they're also quite a thoughtful clinician and quite a quite engaged clinician, and therefore will be up to date with the evidence base and what contemporary practice actually looks like. I might be making a bit of a leap, I don't know, but certainly I would like to think that, at least.
No, I think there's something to that, and I think that that's one of the things that kind of excites me about it in this early stage is that really, if we can bolster the initial service, especially that proof of concept, let's get some numbers through. Let's be able to then audit that against its outcomes and its response rate in patient feedback. Then bolstering that with the right clinicians from that ecosystem of say listeners to this and our wider shows, people on social media that are clearly spending their own time thinking in this direction and really care about these issues on that policy level as well as on the clinical level, because that's the sweet spot, isn't it? This is a social policy maneuver as well as then trying to tether it to clinical excellence on care delivery, right?
We'll be able to measure if we're doing a good job. We've got outcome measures. So, in a very simple form, we're using VAS as one, and then we're also using patient-specific functional scale. And then we've also got PREMS as well. So, patient experience. I mean, the PREMS stuff, I had an interesting conversation, is going to be really skewed because people are going to think that we're great anyway because of what we're doing and offering. It's going to be really hard to get bad feedback. If we're just nice to people and help them for free, we will get really good patient experience data. So I think to an extent, I'm not going to read too much into that. I'll probably focus.
You won't be reading any more into that than the NHS departments do every day, right? We're all cooking the books a little bit sometimes on that, is that you're getting a sample bias that comes with it. So I think, as far as it goes, it'll still have that. We'll still be able to compare across. Although, you're right to be sort of humble in that direction when it's all 10s out of 10s.
Yeah, and I think the more telling one will be our patient-specific functional scale outcomes will be, right, so are we actually having a significant effect within those 3 appointments on people's function and function that's important to them as well, which is why we've used PSFS. So that'll be the really interesting one as it moves forward and to see, are we actually doing what we're intending to do?
So a quick throw to the future for the last couple of minutes, Ollie. Do you have any, we've discussed and I've already asked as to whether or not you have any really specific road that you're trying to go down. You've said not, but what would you say your sort of hopes are or any ideas you've heard as for where this could go in the coming years?
There's a couple of things. So I want to help as many people as possible. I would like to get to a point where Freehab is seeing enough people for us to actually attract some kind of sponsor or commercial input from an entity whereby they're paying for the care that patients are receiving. We want to majority fund this service by corporations and people that can afford to pay for it. So that would be really nice. Obviously, there's a lot of growth to go before we could get anything like that. But that would allow us to provide this service to more patients. So that's one thing. And the other thing we'll be looking at, the AI is going to come into healthcare even more. To what extent can we utilize that even as a filter at the beginning? And how can we use that to potentially help more people? But again, that's a very distant thought for the future because, I'm not experienced enough with AI and healthcare. And there are people out there that are a lot more experienced and thoughtful on that than me. But that's some initial thinking. But we just want to help as many people as we can and see who we can get to pay for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. No, so well, thanks so much for putting it together. I think as I more I think about it, more I realise just how many people would be likely and how many private practices and clinicians that would be able to donate parts of their, and not even just like an hour or so one evening, right? I think that people would be able to pick prime appointments at certain points of their working week in order to try to broaden their demographic of which they see and experience. I think that's one of the things that is a real draw for clinicians, is to think that if you've worked in private practice for long enough, you've come to realise, or if you haven't realised it, then you'd have a wake-up call in primary care in the NHS as to the complex socioeconomic problems and the sequelae of that onto people's health that you would see. It's one of the naiveties that occur in first contact practice when people in the private sector say, we've been first contact practitioners for 20 years. It's like, it's not the same, just because on a governance level and access terms, I get it. and on the legal side, then yeah, fair enough. But the demographic difference between that presentation classically and a private practice patient is different. And I think that this, for thoughtful clinicians that would want to make sure that their skill set is being used across the sort of suite of humanity, then that's something that would and should be a draw. So I'm excited for where that goes. I'm excited for how we can try and get that message out there. As you know, got our full support, and I'm excited at various intervals for us to be able to update people on Freehab on this show and beyond. So well done, thank you, and make sure if you're listening that you go to freehab.co.uk to check it out and keep an eye on it across social media. I imagine you've got all that covered. You're going to be across social media and stuff, Ollie?
Yeah, we're already there. So freehab.co.uk, Twitter's at freehabuk, so is Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're not really posting very much at the minute. I'm not massive on social media, so we're getting somebody in to help. But yeah, do follow us because it all helps.
Absolutely, you've got to get it out there, like as I say, like the touch paper, which it inevitably will do, because the idea is strong enough. So let's just get the message out. So thanks again for all you're doing, Ollie, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for your support. Speak soon.
Cheers, mate. No bother. Speak soon, mate.